house stood at the corner of 4th Avenue, abandoned for over 25 years. Its red paint had faded, peeling like dead skin, its windows cracked and hollow, staring into the night. A cold wind rustled through the overgrown weeds, carrying an eerie silence that made the air feel heavier. No life had stepped inside for decades, until tonight. Officers Graves and Jameson arrived, their headlights barely piercing the dense fog creeping along the ground. A place like this should have been empty, but something was waiting. Something unseen, unheard, until the first scream shattered the night, piercing through the dead air. The Minot Police Department was quiet that night, just the low hum of computers and the occasional crackle of the radio. Officers Graves and Jameson sat at their desks, sipping stale coffee, waiting for the shift to end. Then, the radio erupted. A panicked voice broke through the static, a young woman frantic, gasping for breath. She had heard something terrible. A scream, raw, agonized, inhuman, coming from the abandoned red house on 4th Avenue. The two officers exchanged uneasy glances. That house had been empty for decades, but tonight someone or something was inside, and it was waiting for them. The squad car rolled to a stop in front of the red house, its headlights cutting through the thick fog. The structure loomed before them, its warped wood groaning under the weight of time. The air was stagnant, heavy with something indescribable. Officers Graves and Jameson stepped out, hands instinctively hovering near their holstered weapons. The house had been abandoned for over 2 decades, so why did it feel alive? As they approached the front steps, the wind stilled, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Then from somewhere deep inside, a sound, faint, distant, scratching against the silence. The silence shattered. A scream, raw, tortured, inhuman, erupted from upstairs, echoing through the empty halls. Graves and Jameson froze, their blood running cold. It wasn't just fear, it was agony, something suffering beyond reason. The walls trembled as the sound faded, leaving only the suffocating weight of something watching, waiting. Graves pushed the door open, its rusted hinges wailing in protest. The air inside was thick, stale, tinged with rot. A single staircase stretched upward, vanishing into darkness. The basement door sat slightly ajar, a yawning black void. Jameson swallowed hard. Something was here, something that wasn't supposed to be. As they climbed the creaking stairs, a new sound emerged, scratching. Light at first, like fingernails against wood. Then deeper, more frantic, as if something trapped was trying to claw its way out. Graves and Jameson exchanged a glance, their breaths shallow. Whatever was waiting upstairs, it knew they were coming. At the top of the stairs, a narrow hallway stretched before them. One door stood open, revealing an empty, dust-choked room. The other remained shut, its surface scarred with deep scratches. From inside the open room, a thick red liquid seeped from the closet, slowly, steadily, like something bleeding. The room was silent, too silent. The closet door stood slightly ajar, red pooling beneath it. Then, laughter. Low, breathy, unnatural, drifting from the other room. The temperature dropped. Jameson gripped his gun tighter. Suddenly a scream, closer than before, inches away. The air itself seemed to pulse. They weren't alone. Panic surged. They turned, bolting for the stairs. The hallway stretched, warping in their peripheral vision. Their boots pounded against the wood, each step slower than the last. Behind them, something moved, shifting, watching. A whisper of breath at their necks. The house wasn't letting them go without a fight. Graves glanced back and froze. In the dim light, a gaunt man crouched in the open room. He turned slowly, one empty eye socket, the other gleaming with hunger. Blood dripped from his mouth as he chewed. A severed arm dangled from his grasp. Beside him, a woman's lifeless body lay still. The radio crackled. Backup was coming. Moments later, SWAT stormed the house, weapons raised. The man barely reacted as they dragged him out, his lips curling into a sickening grin. Flesh clung to his teeth, his one good eye staring, empty, unrepentant. He had been waiting, and they had almost joined him. The closet door creaked open. Inside, a woman crouched in the darkness, her breath ragged. eyes wide with something beyond madness. Her hands trembled, gripping a long, blood-stained knife. She had been waiting, silent, patient, just inches from where Graves and Jameson had stood. If they had opened that door first, they would have never made it out. Her lips curled into something between a grin and a snarl, her fingers twitching over the blade. SWAT restrained her, but she never stopped staring, never stopped grinning. In that moment, Graves realized she wasn't the victim. She had been part of the horror. Years later, Graves sat alone in his dimly lit home, a glass of whiskey trembling in his hand. The weight of that night never left him. He could still hear the screams, the laughter, the sickening squelch of flesh between teeth. The red house remained abandoned, untouched, a rotting corpse on 4th Avenue. No one dared go near it. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind was still, Graves swore he could hear it. The faint sound of scratching from within, as if something or someone was still waiting, watching. The house hadn't forgotten, and neither had he. The night was still, the air thick with an eerie silence. Streetlights flickered along the quiet neighborhood, casting long, shifting shadows. On her porch, a woman sat, her fingers idly running through the fur of her loyal dog. But her eyes, they were fixed on the roof, scanning it with quiet unease. She had spoken of something lurking above her, unseen, yet ever present. The dog let out a low growl, ears twitching. The woman shivered, but said nothing. Across the street, her neighbor watched, unaware that tonight would be the last time things would ever feel normal again. She spoke of it often, whispered warnings about the thing in her roof. At first, it seemed like paranoia, just another eerie story to pass the time. She described hearing soft scratches above her bed, faint footsteps pacing when she was alone. Sometimes, she swore she saw shadows moving where there shouldn't be any. But no matter how much she tried to ignore it, the feeling never left. Someone, or something, was watching. Each night, the sounds grew bolder, closer. Her dog would growl at the ceiling, but there was never anything there. At least nothing she could see. The clock struck 3 a.m. The world outside was silent until it wasn't. A scream, raw and filled with terror, shattered the night. It wasn't just fear. It was agony, desperation. The kind of scream that chills the soul. He bolted upright, heart hammering, ears straining. Then he knew it was her, his neighbor. He rushed to the window, the scream still echoing in his ears. Darkness swallowed her house. No movement, no signs of life, except her voice. A frantic, muffled cry for help, but the doors were locked, the windows shut. Something was inside with her, and he was too late. He ran to her house, pounding on the door, but it wouldn't budge. The windows were sealed tight. Inside, her screams grew weaker, more desperate. His chest tightened. She was trapped, and he was powerless. The sirens grew louder, flashing lights cutting through the darkness. But would they be fast enough? Red and blue lights bathed the street as officers forced their way inside. Silence. Then they found her, curled on the floor, trembling, eyes wide with unspeakable horror. She didn't scream. She didn't speak. She just stared, as if whatever she had seen was still there, watching, waiting. A month passed before he saw her again. She had moved to a new house, smaller, quieter, safer, or so she hoped. When he visited, she looked different, hollow, like a piece of her had been left behind that night. She sat across from him, hands trembling around a cup of untouched tea. At first, she said nothing, just stared at the floor, lost in something unseen. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. I thought I was safe, but I wasn't. That night I learned the truth. She looked up, eyes haunted. And it was worse than you think. That night it started with a phone call. The clock read 2:30 a.m. Half asleep, she answered, but there was only silence. Heavy, unnatural. She hesitated, then hung up. Moments later it rang again. This time a sound came through. Not a voice, Something muffled, distorted, like breathing pressed against fabric. A chill ran down her spine. "Hello?" she whispered. No response, just the sound of something shifting. Too close. She ended the call, heart pounding. The room felt colder. She sat in the dark, breath unsteady, telling herself it was nothing. But deep down she knew someone was there. Watching. Waiting. Fear crept in like a slow poison. Her hands trembled as she reached under the bed, seeking comfort in the one thing that had always been there. Her dog. A wet, warm lick met her palm. Familiar. Reassuring. She exhaled shakily, whispering, "Good boy." But then, a sound. A soft creak from the bathroom. Her body stiffened. The air felt different now, thick, suffocating. Slowly, she turned toward the half-open door, shadows shifting beyond it. Her breath caught in her throat. If her dog was under the bed, then who or what was in the bathroom? The room suddenly felt far too small. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she stepped toward the bathroom. The door creaked open, revealing darkness. And then, the smell, iron, thick and suffocating. Her breath hitched. The dim light flickered, exposing a nightmare. Her dog lay motionless, stomach torn open, lifeless eyes staring. Blood smeared the walls, forming jagged, dripping words. "Your dog isn't the only thing that can lick your hand." A choked sob escaped her lips. Her mind reeled, refusing to believe. Then, behind her, the floor creaked. The air turned ice cold. She wasn't alone, she never had been. And now, it was too late. Terror gripped her as she stumbled backward, heart pounding like a drum. The room seemed to close in, the shadows stretching unnaturally. Then, a whisper right behind her. Hot breath against her neck. She spun around, but the darkness swallowed everything. Suddenly, a hand, cold, inhuman, clamped onto her wrist. A guttural, rasping voice slithered into her ear. "I've been here all along." She tried to scream, but it died in her throat. The last thing she saw was a twisted grin emerging from the void. Then, darkness. Silence. The house stood still once more, as if nothing had ever happened at all. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the distant hum of crickets. The old diesel shop sat in the darkness, rusting buses scattered across the lot like forgotten relics. Beyond it, the house stood alone, dimly lit, its windows reflecting the cold glow of the television inside. Jason, just 12 years old, lay slumped on the couch, half awake, the flickering screen casting shifting shadows across the walls. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, but something else lingered in the night, something unseen, watching, waiting. Jason didn't know it yet, but he was not alone. The silence shattered. 5 sharp knocks, precise and deliberate, echoed through the house. A pause, then 5 more. Jason stirred, his mind foggy with sleep. The knocks weren't frantic nor hesitant. They were rhythmic, intentional, wrong. His heart pounded as he sat up, ears straining. No one ever used that door, the one behind the locked gate. Another round of knocking, harder this time. Then a flicker of movement. A beam of light pierced the glass, landing directly on him. Jason froze. The night outside was empty, yet something was there, and it wanted him to open the door. Then came the voices, low, unnatural, seeping through the glass like smoke. "Little boy, come here." Jason's breath hitched. The words were slow, almost sweet, but something in them was wrong. Another voice followed, raspier, more impatient. "Come open the door, kid." Jason's skin prickled. He couldn't see their faces, only shifting shadows beyond the glass. The flashlight clicked off, plunging the figures into deeper darkness. The night seemed to tighten around him, pressing in from all sides. Whoever they weren't lost. They weren't asking. They were calling to him, like hunters luring prey. Jason's feet moved before his mind could stop them, drawn toward the door. The air felt heavier with each step. "Who are you? What do you want?" His voice was small, unsteady. The answer came smooth, rehearsed. "We're the police. We need to speak with your parents." Jason hesitated. Something about their tone felt off, too forced, too eager. Open the door. Now the second voice snapped, its patience fraying. Jason's stomach twisted. He peered through the glass but saw only shifting darkness. No uniforms, no badges. Just shadows pressing closer, waiting, as if they knew. He was alone. Jason's pulse pounded in his ears. Something wasn't right. He glanced toward the driveway, searching for flashing lights, for a police cruiser. Instead, he saw it. A black Tahoe, unmarked, sitting in the darkness like a waiting beast. A single dim blue light flickered on the dashboard. Weak, unconvincing squad cars didn't look like that. Police didn't leave their badges in their vehicles, and no real officer demanded entry at 3 a.m. His breath caught in his throat. They weren't cops. They were something else, something that wanted in. And Jason had almost let them. The air grew colder. They knew he knew. Jason's legs finally obeyed his fear. He ran. Down the hall into his parents' room, gasping out the warning. Within moments, his mother was at the door, flipping on the porch light. The figures flinched. "Who the hell are you telling my son to open the door at this hour?" she demanded. One of them stepped closer, voice calm but insistent. "We're the police, ma'am. Open up." But she wasn't fooled. No uniforms, no badges, just two strangers standing too still, too expectant. She wasn't alone anymore, and they knew it outside. The night held its breath. The men didn't leave. They pressed closer, their patience unraveling. Fists pounded against the door, shaking the glass. "Open up now!" The raspy voice was sharp, angry. Then, the glint of steel, a shotgun raised just beyond the glass. Jason's mother tensed. Before she could move, his father stepped into view, silent but steady. A 9mm pistol in his hands, aimed directly at the door. "Back away." Now, his voice was cold, unwavering. For the first time, the figures hesitated. A moment stretched thin. The night was on the edge of something violent. Then, the glass shattered. Glass exploded inward, shards scattering across the floor. Jason flinched as a pale, desperate hand reached through the jagged hole, fingers stretching for the chain lock they knew. They had always known. The wooden door wasn't locked, just the chain. The hand fumbled, trembling with urgency. They weren't knocking anymore, they were coming in. Jason's father didn't hesitate. "Stop, now." His voice was steel. The fingers didn't stop. They curled around the chain, tugging, almost free. A gunshot tore through the silence. The hand jerked back, a smear of blood left behind. Outside, something screamed. Then, footsteps, retreating fast. The gunfire cracked through the night. 3 deafening shots. Jason's ears rang as the figures outside recoiled. One stumbled back, clutching his wounded arm, dark blood dripping onto the porch. For a moment there was silence. Then, panic. They scrambled toward the Tahoe, boots crunching over gravel. The engine roared to life, headlights slicing through the darkness. Tires spun, kicking up dust as the SUV fishtailed out of the driveway. Vanishing into the night, Jason's mother was still gripping his arm. His father kept the gun trained on the empty doorway, breath steady. It was over. But for how long? The house stood in eerie silence. The only sound Jason could hear was the heavy breathing of his parents. The shattered glass crunched beneath their feet as his father cautiously stepped toward the broken door, gun still raised, scanning the yard. The night felt different now, colder, heavier, like something unnatural had just brushed against them and slipped back into the darkness. Outside, the distant hum of an approaching engine grew louder. Flashing red and blue lights flooded the yard, painting the broken glass in shifting colors. The real police had arrived. Too late. An officer stepped out, scanning the scene. He took one look at the shattered door, the blood smeared across the frame, and the still smoking pistol in Jason's father's hands. "What happened here?" Jason's mother explained in a breathless rush. 2 men impersonating police, demanding entry, the gun, the shots. The officer's expression darkened. "Did you see their faces?" Jason swallowed. "Barely. Just glimpses. Glasses, a scraggly beard, dark clothing. Nothing concrete, nothing useful." Another officer knelt beside the shattered glass, collecting a blood sample left behind. We'll run it, but without an actual crime committed, there's not much we can do." Jason's stomach sank. They had broken in, threatened them, nearly forced their way inside. And yet, it wasn't enough. As the officers secured the area, one leaned in close to Jason's father. "We'll patrol the area for a few nights. But if they come back, you do what you have to do." The police left. The house fell quiet again. Jason lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. He knew deep down, whoever they weren't just criminals. They were something worse, and they weren't finished.